Hey, this is Kevin with the Lordship Ministries, and this is the first installment of the practice of submission. Each month, we go over one of the spiritual disciplines as a way of practicing and following Christ and what He would want us to do. If you've ever heard of Dallas Willard or John Ortberg or Richard Foster, these are some of the recent writers that have talked about the different spiritual disciplines. And so we do one each month. There's 12 spiritual disciplines that we cover in what is called SD 12. The 12 spiritual disciplines plan for discipleship. And it's a way to follow Christ, to follow what He showed us by His example and what He told us to obey and do. So submission, what is it? Every one of these spiritual disciplines has a freedom. And so the freedom of submission is the ability to lay down the terrible burden of always needing to get our own way, becoming free from the demand that things go our way. Things go the way we want them to go. Isn't that freeing? I mean, don't you just feel good about that? Submitting to the will of God. Luke chapter 22 and verse 42 is one of our verses. Key verses, we call them. Father, if you're willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. And that is the power of submission, of submitting our will to His will. Why? Because we don't know what really we should be doing, but we know we should be following Christ. And in submission, we submit to His will over our will. And one of the things that challenges us, that develops submission in our lives, is perseverance through suffering, through difficulties, through trials. Let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, the writer of Hebrews said. In other words, just don't quit. Now, the experience of suffering, the capacity to finish well, is what the New Testament writers call endurance or perseverance. It's the virtue by which we become increasingly able to honor commitments that ought to last a lifetime. It is especially the ability to honor commitments when honoring becomes difficult. Listen to this phrase. Listen to this saying. Any true, meaningful human accomplishment will require perseverance. Spiritual transformation will not happen without it. Now, that spiritual transformation that we talk about in SD 12 is becoming Christ-like. How is Christ formed in us, as the Apostle Paul said? James talks about, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of any kind, consider it nothing but joy, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance, and let endurance have its full effect so that you may become mature and complete in lacking nothing. Now, the joy is not that we're suffering. The joy is not in what we're suffering, but the joy is the fact that as a result of persevering through suffering, which life gives us all the time. Somebody once said, life is a series of crises with a little bit of peace in between. And I think most of us look back on our lives and we can see some of those things, some of those crises that we have done to ourselves by not following Christ, but some are just natural to life and the things that naturally happen that are difficult in life. And so as we persevere through that suffering, through that difficult time, then what it produces in us is submission and maturity, because submitting to God's will and following God's will requires that we surrender our will to Him and follow Christ. And one of the greatest examples that we have in Scripture is Abraham in Genesis chapter 22 and verse 1 through 19. I won't read the whole thing here, but it's where Abraham is taking his son, his only son, as God had told him to do, to Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I will show you. Frederick Buechner and I don't know if I'm saying his name right, says it so well. He says of Abraham and Sarah and Isaac, he's Isaac born in the geriatric ward for which Medicare picked up the tab. This child named Isaac, which means laughter. Abraham and Sarah laughed at first because they didn't believe. They laughed at the sheer impossibility of it. They laughed because they were told they would have a son when they didn't even dare to buy green bananas. And after the child was born, they laughed because they didn't believe. They laughed that when Sarah went to Walmart, she was the only shopper to buy both Pampers and Depends. They laughed that both parents and after the child was born, they laughed because they didn't believe. They laughed that when Sarah went to Walmart, she was the only shopper to buy both Pampers and Depends. They laughed that both parents and baby had to eat the same strained vegetables because nobody in the whole family had a single tooth. Sometimes when we have to walk through these difficult times and challenging times, that's where God develops the character of Christ-likeness in us, the faith that grows, and the transformation that we receive as a result of going through these difficult times and these testing times and struggling times. You know, we have tried to discover, or we've tried to explain it away, saying that, you know, testing sometimes or suffering, you know, maybe that's because you have sin in your life. Well, let me tell you something. Sometimes it's because God is working in us to transform us into his likeness. And we have to endure that suffering. You know, do you see people around Abraham and Sarah going, oh, they must have sinned somehow. That's why they got to take Isaac up there and sacrifice him. No, not at all. This is something God had promised way before and that he was going to accomplish even if they didn't really believe. So in this first edition of Submission, the Spiritual Discipline, I want to challenge you to look at what God is doing in your life and ways that you can submit to his will instead of your will in those areas. We're going to keep growing. We're going to go through difficult times, but count it all joy because God's working in you. He's maturing you. He's preparing you for what he wants you to do because every one of us are making disciples. People are following us. Your kids, your grandkids, neighbor kids, co-workers, people at church, you name it, they're following. We're all followers. And so I want to ask you the question, by following you, will they find Jesus? By following your example, not what you say, but what you do, will they find Jesus? God bless you. Lesson 2 is coming up pretty soon.